review number 5, which should now be a repeat of things we've seen before. And I broke it up into segments for you guys so it'd be a little bit more manageable. And I also strategically chose very specific numbers to go over. When I'm done going over all of them, I will release an answer key to every problem in this packet. But the ones that we should focus on are the ones I picked. So we're going to start off with 1 through 7, where basically the first part is match each equation with one of the 5 graphs. All right, so the very first one we see here, the equation is y equals 3, 2 to the x. Now that means it's an exponential function, so this is exponential. So we need to find an exponential graph. So that's something that shoots up in the air or comes down. And I'm hoping you guys are noticing that's what's happening in D here. So number 1 should have been choice D. All right, a log graph. Now a log graph kind of shoots up in the air and kind of pitters out, which is E. Okay. Secant is trig, right? But secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So I'm hoping you realized it was A. Now, how that would work is think of the cosine graph. Now check this out. You should be able to graph cosine within it. See that? See how that red curve right there? There's cosine, and secant would be the reciprocal of that. All right, a power function, right? This would be x to the 1/3 power. It's a root, right? And that is going to, now, you can take the cube root of positive numbers. You can also take the cube root of negative numbers. So it's going to be this guy, which is b, right? This one is 4x to the -1, right? This is a power function. And it is going to be letter C. Okay, where they go in opposite quadrants like that, all right? Notice x is in the denominator, right? That means the vertical asymptote has to be x equals 0. Notice this has a vertical asymptote at x equals 0. So that's another way you guys could have determined that answer. So that's 1 through 5 already. For number 6, it says, which of the 4 graphs is this guy? All right, now what I would do is think about what is the parent function of this. Well, the parent function would be y equals radical x. Now let's talk about what that graph would look like. So if I'm graphing y equals radical x, all right, first off, let's think about the domain. The domain, right, we can't have negatives in here, right? So we have 0, which we can have, right? We can't have any negatives, but I can plug in 1, 2, 3, right? So the domain is going to be 0 to infinity. So if I were to graph this, I'll make an x and y chart. I'm going to plug in 0 and up, and we'll get an idea of what's happening here, right? What's the square root of 0? 0. What's the square root of 1? Radical 2, radical 3, radical 4 is 2, right? If you want to, just pick numbers you can take square roots of, right? How about 25 would be 5, or 16 would be 4. So if I were to graph y equals radical x, I would have these points: 0, 0, 1, 1, 4, 2, 9, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Here's 9, 3. Right? So here, this is the graph of y equals radical x. Now let's talk about what this wants us to do. This is actually shifting this picture around, right? Now I always go from left to right. The negative out in front, right? A negative out in front means a reflection. So this is going to be a reflection over the x-axis. That means this picture is going to flip upside down. So let me grab a different color here. That means this thing would flip like this, right? That's the negative out in front. The +2 inside the radical, that means it's shifting. So here, I'll make little bullets. So it was a reflection over x-axis. That's the first thing. Then the x plus 2 inside the radical means it's shifting 2 to the left. So this black arch has got to go back 2 and then up 4. So let's look at our 4 choices, right? We need something that's upside down, so it's not going to be this guy, right? So it's got to look like this. So these 3 are kind of in the running, right? It's got to go back this way, all right? It's got to go back this way and then up 4. And notice it has an end point. It does not have an arrow at the end. So that actually eliminates these guys, leaving us with C. Notice this has an end point. So that guy would be C. All right. Then for number 7, which of the 4 graphs at the right is 2.8 to the x? Now, I'm going to write this down here. Y equals 2.8 to the x. Now, this is an exponential graph. And I know it's an exponential graph because there's an x in the exponent. We need to decide if it's an increasing graph or a decreasing graph. Because 0.8 is less than 1, it's got to be a decreasing graph. So right away, that means I'm looking for something that looks like that with an asymptote at the x-axis. So let's take a look, right? It's poorly drawn, but choice D would be that guy. All right, and that's how you'd figure out those. All right, now after those guys, I asked you to do 1 through 7. Then I asked you guys a good one to try would be number 10. So down here, number 10. Write the function that results when f of x equals the absolute value of x is shifted 2 to the left, then reflected over the x-axis, then up 3. All right, so we're going to do a new one. So we're going to do f of x. We want it shifted 2 to the left. Now, you always have to go in order that they mentioned it. So 2 to the left means I'm going to add 2 to the x. Then we're going to reflect it over the x-axis. Okay? And then it's got to go up 3. And that's all you have to do for that one. All right, next one I asked you to do was number 12. The next page. All right, let's take a look at number 12. Right. Number 12 says, for the given graph at the right, this guy, determine for each interval if the graph is increasing or decreasing and the concavity. All right, as we go from A to B, right, this graph, now you're always going left to right, so you're going to the right. If we start at A and we head to B, this is totally decreasing. So that's going to be decreasing. And notice the curvature looks like almost like a happy face parabola, so that means it's going to be concave up. So I'm going to put CU. All right. Now, as I head from B to C, the graph is still going down. So it's still decreasing, right? But however, look at how it looks. See how it turned into kind of like a sad face parabola on this side of it? So that's going to be concave down. All right, from C to D. Now the graph is going upwards. So it's increasing. And notice the happy face parabola again, so it's concave up. Okay. Then we've got from, where are we? D to E. It's increasing. However, it's a sad face parabola here. So it's concave down. And from E to F, it's decreasing. Concave down. All right, that was number 12. Okay. Then I asked you guys to do 16 and 17. So I'm going to drop down here. All right. Now, if g of x equals 6 sine 4x minus 3, I want to find the following things. All right, what would the amplitude be? Well, I'm hoping you're like, okay, amplitude is 6. The midline. The midline's always the thing holding off on the end, and that's going to be the equation y equals -3. Right? The midline's a horizontal line. That's why I'm writing it as y equals. So it's y equals -3. All right, the period. The period is 2 pi over the frequency, and the frequency is going to be 4. And I always want the most simplified version, so pi over 2 would be the answer there. And now I'd actually want you to graph it. All right, so let me get some scrap paper again. So I'm going to graph part D on another piece of paper here if I can get a hold of it. All right, so here's my equation. G of x equals 6 sine 4x minus 3. Now we want to graph this. Now while I did answer these couple of questions, when I go to graph it, I'm going to make the whole list of info. Now the first thing you guys should remember is you cannot have a number in the parenthesis in front of the x. So before I do anything here, I'm going to pull that 4 out. So I separate the frequency from any shifting. Okay, and now I'm going to start making my list. So the amp is 6. We already talked about that. So that's amplitude. The frequency is 4. And then the period, which is 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2. All right, so amplitude, frequency, period, I got from these two. All right, oops, from those two, the 6 and the 4. Then look at the x. There's nothing in there with it. What does that mean the starting point is going to be? That means it's going to start at x equals 0. Because there's nothing in there. Now once I have the starting point, I'm going to get the ending point by taking the starting point and adding on the period. All right? So that means one complete cycle will end by pi over 2. And finally, the number on the end gives me the midline. So the midline is going to be y equals -3. And that will help us get the max and the min by combining this guy with the amplitude. So -3 plus 6 makes 3. -6, -3 minus 6 is -9. Now I have enough information to graph it. Right? Now what I want you to keep in mind is this interval. I do want you to graph from 0 all the way out to pi. So we're going to keep that in mind in a minute. All right, so here we go. Okay, so starting at 0, and I'm going to be ending by pi. Okay, then I know my midline is down at -3. 1, 2, 3. There's my midline. Okay, my max is going to be up at +3. And my minimum is at -9. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. -9. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at this now. We are graphing sine, right? We're graphing sine. Now remember, the sine curve looks like this. That means it's starting on the midline and it's ending on the midline. So when I go to graph this now, I'll get a different marker here. I'm going to start on the midline and end on the midline. And notice right here in the middle it's going to be on the midline. Now what would be halfway to pi over 2? Well, if you did pi over 2 times a half, it'd be pi over 4. So that means this location right here is pi over 4. Now notice in the sine curve, halfway, we're up at the top. At the max, so halfway between these two, which would be pi over 8, we're going to be up the max. Okay? And then halfway between these guys, we're going to be down here. Now, see how that's pi over 8? So 1 pi over 8, 2 pi over 8. This right here would be 3 pi over 8, 4 pi over 8. So here's our graph. Now, the trick here is I asked you to graph out to pi, which means you have to keep going. So 1 pi over 8, 2 pi over 8, 3 pi over 8, 4 pi over 8. Then we're going to do 5 pi over 8, 6 pi over 8, 7 pi over 8. And guys, what would 8 pi over 8 make? Pi. Okay? So you're just going to repeat this pattern. One more time. It's a little sloppy. But there you go. Whoa, I should my marker. So that's what the graph would look like if I had to go all the way out to pi. All right, so that was number 16. Now in number 17, it's kind of going the opposite direction. I'm going to give you the picture first, and I want you to come up with an equation. Great. Now, considering we just did a sine curve, this looks like an upside down sine curve, right? So it looks like this is going to be a sine equation. So y equals, and because it's an upside down sine curve, I know it's going to be a negative sign. So I put negative blank sign. Now, when you're doing these, you want to find the midline first. So it's kind of looking like it's going to be right there. All right? So look at the scaling. Always pay attention to the scaling. Notice this is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 2, 4. So this is at 6. So that means my midline is going to be plus 6 on the end. So that means my amplitude would be this, right? And again, because it's scaled by 2s, that's 2, 4. So that means we'd have a negative 4 there. Now, I always like to do the shift next. Where is this graph starting? Starting right here, which is above x equals 0. So that means x is going to be all by itself in there. And finally, we need the frequency. Now, to get the frequency, we need the period. And the formula for period is 2 pi over b. Well, what is the period of this graph? Meaning, how far is it from the beginning point to the ending point? Well, this picture is starting at 0, and it's ending at 8 pi. So that means the period is equal to 8 pi over 1. I need the b put right there. So I'm going to cross multiply. That makes 2 pi equals 8 pi b. I'm going to divide by 8 pi. Get the b alone. Well, then the pi's cancel. And 2 over 8 makes 1/4. So that is the equation that goes with this picture. All right. So those are the questions I felt were most important on the first 2 pages. You guys are more than welcome to do the other questions on here. I just picked ones. These other questions are good ones to practice as well. I just trying to not overwhelm you with work. I'm trying to hit super close ones. But if you do the other questions in this packet, it's not like you're wasting your time. But I'm trying to strategically hit stuff that I'm worried about. Again, I'm going to post an answer key that's like perfect for you guys to look at once I'm done going through all the parts.